All right, I just started live streaming and it's up.
Hi, my name is Nancy Capistran. I'm a Greater Boston Peer Advisory Group Chair for CEOs, as well as an award-winning internationally certified executive coach and crisis advisor. I'd like to introduce Tara Goodwin, who is my business partner at Crisis Interception. Since founding her company, Goodwin PR, in 2001, Tara attracts, engages, and sustains clients ranging from startups and nonprofits to multi-million-dollar companies, high-profile CEOs, professional athletes, and coaches. She is considered an expert in media relations, crisis management, strategic events, and effective content development and curation. Tara leads decisive change in times of extreme adversity. She provides mental toughness, uncommon agility, sensitivity, professionalism, and sound counsel. Tara has won numerous awards throughout the years. I am thrilled that she is with us today. Welcome, Tara.
Hi, Nancy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. This is the third part of our podcast series, Embracing Risk and Navigating Crisis. Specifically today, we're going to talk about the anatomy of an effective crisis response. Tara, I want to ask you a couple of questions. I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on these. So what are the key questions to ask your team in a crisis to help you make the most informed decisions?
Well, the first thing that you have to ask, and it sounds very intuitive, but sometimes you don't, is what happened? How did this happen? Who was involved? Were there any other witnesses? Who was hurt? Was anyone injured? Bystanders, customers, employees, subcontractors? If so, what are the extent of the injuries? Any deaths? And then what is the company's policy regarding safety, theft, embezzlement, whatever the situation is? Is there a policy or procedure that you have on the books, and was it followed? A lot of times we see a disconnect between a policy and the way it was executed. So we always ask, were normal protocols and procedures followed? The other question that executives have to ask, if it's something particularly devastating, is what's being done to ensure this will never happen again? Because that's going to lead into your crisis response. You want to make sure that you're not only taking control of the crisis, but you're also asking these questions so that you can get the best information that you possibly can. You know, was the problem, so let's say there was a problem on the manufacturing floor, a machine exploded, someone was hurt. Was the problem discovered right away? If not, why? Was it something that, you know, broke down later on, or was there an early indicator that the machine was in trouble, for example? Yeah. The other question, and this is with the help of the CFO, is how much money and time did this crisis cost our company? That's after the crisis, but that is an absolute question that you should ask. What's the extent of the damage to the company, both from a reputational perspective and from a financial perspective? And then how could this have been avoided? Was there a mistake that we made along the way that we should have caught earlier that could have prevented this from happening? And normally, by definition, you can't really prevent a crisis from happening at a certain point. But if it starts out as that small business problem that we talked about in the earlier series, you could potentially head it off and stop it from getting worse.
And you know what? I often look at this, the key questions. I often think of it as who, what, when, where, why, if they can figure that out, and how. Those 6, when you can get the answers to some of those things, at least some of them, it helps you to be able to figure out the best steps forward.
It's so true. And that's just like journalism. When you're writing journalism articles, that is exactly what they taught us in journalism school, the who, what, where, why, what, how, and when. And then the other question, which again goes back to trust that we talked about, the one thing that CEOs want is, why should your customers or stakeholders have confidence in your ability to navigate through and prevent a repeat of this transgression? Whether it's cybercrime, embezzlement, you often hear boards will do votes of no confidence in the CEO. So how can you ensure as a CEO that your crisis leadership is going to come out okay? And that's something that's really important to ask as well.
Yeah, and I think the whole piece about informed decision, some people, they just want all the data, what's going on. It is a living, breathing situation, and it's evolving every second. And so you're not necessarily going to have all the information that you need. So you have to really trust the people that you're getting this information from, validating it and making sure it makes sense. And then when you have enough to be able to put something out there, being very intentional about what that looks like.
And intentionality is so important, Nancy. You're absolutely 100% right. Because if you just put something out there, it's not going to ring with authenticity and transparency and forethought, most important. And that's what we preach and teach to our executives.
Yeah, for sure. And so that kind of leads us now into the next question, which is about holding statements. Why it's crucial to your success in navigating a crisis.
So before we talk about the why, I'm going to talk about what is a holding statement, because a lot of people don't understand what that is. And in a crisis, a holding statement is a statement where a CEO acknowledges what happened, what they plan to do about it, and when they plan to update the stakeholders, the audience. And sometimes a crisis communication can just be to your employees. It doesn't have to go outside the company. There are a lot of times with citizen journalists and employees that it will go outside the company, but thinking about who your stakeholders are and holding statements, the anatomy is the same, whether you're communicating to employees, whether you're communicating to your board of directors, whether you're communicating to your customers or the general public. The premise remains the same. And so the statement itself should probably be about 4 to 8 sentences long. You don't want to say too much, but you want to make sure you cover the bases. And the first thing that you do is acknowledge what happened. You tell people exactly what happened and when. And you don't want to be evasive. You don't want to be defensive. You just want a straight acknowledgement. Today at 2 o'clock, one of our employees was killed on the job, tragically killed when a machine, blew up, something along those lines, exploded. Acknowledge what happened. It's a statement that you are aware of the issue. The second piece, obviously, is empathy for the victim or potential victims. And you've heard a lot, our thoughts and prayers go out to. Well, when Uvalde happened, a lot of the parents said, we don't want your thoughts and prayers. We want action. We want people fired. We want more. So you have to make sure that your expression of empathy or sympathy is taken the right way. It's very important. It's very nuanced. And that's why having pros help you with this is very, very important. And then what are the values that inform your response? At XYZ Company, our core values are integrity, we are family, transparency, honesty, whatever those happen to be. You want to make sure that those are woven into the fabric of your holding statement, because you want to talk about what your company stands for. And then you want to talk about a commitment. What are you willing to do? And you hear a lot of times, We will cooperate with the investigation. We're conducting our own internal investigation. We're working with state and local authorities to get to the bottom of this situation, and we'll report back to you. And what kind of commitment can you make to people? We'll report back to you in a week. We'll report back to you in an hour, depending on the severity of the crisis. And again, it speaks to what we talked about in one of the segments about that first mover advantage. Whoever is the first to define the crisis has a much better control of interpreting and communicating that event and managing the crisis. So we want to get out there as fast and as first and as accurately as we can. And that's why planning helps that happen.
So if in like one sentence or two, you could say, what is the goal of that holding statement?
It's to put a stake in the ground and position your company that you are aware there is a crisis, you are on top of it, and you are handling it. And you will get back to your public as soon as the next stage of the crisis evolves. And as we know, Nancy, crisis is a cycle, and it goes around, and you have to get the facts. Then you have to think about the plan. You have to decide what you're going to say. Then you have to release that information. Then you have to wait to see how it's interpreted. You may or may not have to release more information until the next cycle of crisis happens, because often it just does not happen in a linear fashion. It's more cyclical, and you have to watch for those signs and cycles and make sure that you're ready to respond at every point in the crisis until it starts to wind down. And then after that, as you know, we always talk about post-crisis eval. How did we do? What could we have done better? And what do we need to put in place to ensure that we react better next time?
And one last question that I'm just going to throw in there. And it's really around no comment when there's a situation and the CEO is asked. Maybe there's somebody camping out at his house right outside the building by his car or something, or her car. What are your thoughts around that?
That you never say no comment, because no comment implies that you have something to hide. It's implied guilt. And you see that all the time when you see someone being either escorted into a police car and journalists are in your face saying no comment. And there's really no place for no comment, because I would argue as a PR professional, there's always something you could say. And you could use a technique called bridging. Someone throws a question at you and you can say, I can't answer that, but what I can tell you is, and then you bridge back to the message that you want to disseminate. So there are strategies and tactics that you can employ to answer questions without giving away any kind of legal vulnerability, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think it's always good to kind of have something in your back pocket, having talked to your attorney or your communications people. What is something that you can say that doesn't make you appear guilty or put too much information out there that is still confidential? So it's a slippery slope, and it should be short and sweet, but very intentional in every word that you choose, right, for that statement.
And what you and I do, Nancy, and in our workshops and training sessions, is we put CEOs through their paces.
Yeah.
And we create a real crisis situation that could potentially happen to their company. We use real employees' names, real scenarios that scare them and help them understand how they can communicate, because then we ask them to write a holding statement in a short period of time, 15 or 20 minutes. Sometimes if I'm feeling generous, I'll give them a half hour, but it's still a very unnerving process when you're saying, hey, Channel 4 is outside waiting for a comment. The Boston Globe's on the phone right now, and has a deadline. So those are the kinds of pressures that we put our CEOs under to make sure that they're ready to respond.
And that's so mission critical, because when the heat is on, every second matters.
It's so true, Nancy. And, one of the best compliments that I ever received from one of my sessions was a CEO in a Vistage group who told me 2 weeks after I spoke, they had one of the worst crises in their company's history, didn't see it coming. And he said, I had everything I needed to get the information and respond as quickly as possible. And I can tell you, it would not have gone as well as it did had I not had that intelligence and those strategies. And that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, for sure. It's an important factor that often gets overlooked, but the more you're prepared, the better you're going to respond.
100%.
Yeah. Well, Tara, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. This has been a blast, and we'll have to do it again sometime soon. Thank you for all the listeners here. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our website is crisis crisisinterception.com. crisisinterception.com. Thank you.
Thank you.